Welcome back to Myths and Misadventures from the National Hellenic Museum. My name is Cairo, and I am your storyteller. In this series, I share stories about gods, heroes, and monsters from Greek mythology, and today, I will be telling you the story of Atalanta the Light-Footed, a famed huntress and adventurer from Greek mythology. Our version of today's story comes from our old friend, Mortals and Immortals of Greek Mythology, and I will put more information about it in the video description. Now, without further ado, let's get mythical. Atalanta the Light-Footed. When Atalanta was born, her father, Iasus, the king of Arcadia, was angry. He wanted a son who could become a warrior or a famous hunter and inherit all that was his, but he had a daughter. As was the custom in those times when one didn't want to keep their child, he brought the baby to the wooded slopes of a mountain near the city of Calydon and abandoned the little girl. Artemis, goddess of the hunt, happened to be nearby at the time. She heard a newborn crying and found a beautiful, healthy little girl who demanded to be fed. At this time, bears lived in the forests and were among Artemis's favorite animals. She asked one of the bears to nurse the child and entrusted her to a group of hunters. They raised her and taught her all they knew: how to live in nature, the habits of wild beasts, how to shoot a bow, throw a javelin, and use a cutlass. By the time she was an adolescent, Atalanta was already a more capable hunter than many men. And because she was so fast in foot races, she was given the nickname Atalanta the Light-Footed. When Jason set out to capture the Golden Fleece, he gathered all the most valorous young people in Greece. Atalanta was the only woman among them. Some of their party protested. She was too pretty to risk in the danger ahead. She should stay home and spin and weave wool. But Jason knew her reputation. And so she stayed on board the Argo to take part in the hunt. After several years, Atalanta returned to Greece, hoping to find her family and gain her father's respect. Iasus must have known that she was one of the Argonauts, but for some reason he didn't receive her. She then heard of a particularly dangerous boar hunt that was happening in the forests of Calydon. She had to take part no matter what. Maybe in doing so, she'd finally be able to reach her father's heart. What had happened was that the king of Calydon, Oeneus, had angered Artemis when he offered sacrifice to the 12 gods of Olympus and forgot the goddess of the hunt. She took revenge by sending a monstrous boar to attack the king's men and ravage his crops. Oeneus called all the most valiant men in Greece, including Jason, Theseus of Athens and his friends Pirithous, Castor and Pollux, Helen's twin brothers, Peleus, who would become Achilles' father, and his brother Telamon, who were Oeneus' brothers-in-law, as well as his own son, Meleager. Atalanta also presented herself. When Meleager saw this slender young woman who moved so gracefully and stood so tall with such confidence, Meleager fell in love. "Whoever marries her will be a happy man," he said, making the men of the group, and his uncles in particular, uncomfortable. "A woman, she can only bring us bad luck," they complained. They demanded that she be placed at the back of their group, far away from them. Under the moonlight, they made their way deep into the forest. Some of them were armed with lances, javelins, and axes, and others, including Atalanta, wielded bows. They walked forward in silence, a few feet away from each other, toward a glade of willow trees near the water where they found the boar. The animal was swimming. It heard them, jumped out of the water, killed 2 of the hunters and injured another, and a 4th hunter quickly climbed up a tree. Peleus and Telamon courageously approached the boar, lances in hand, but Telamon's foot got caught in a root and he fell. As Peleus was helping him stand, the boar charged them. That would have been the end of them if Atalanta hadn't been able to fire an arrow and hit the beast behind the ear, sending it running, temporarily. Behind her, Ancaeus said, "That's no way to hunt. Watch and learn." He threw his axe at the boar and missed. The animal turned around, charged, and disemboweled him. Then it was Theseus's turn, but his javelin missed too. Fortunately, Meleager had his own javelin in hand, and he reached the boar's right side as it was turning toward him, trying to get the arrow out of its injury. That gave the young man the chance to stab his lance into the monster's flank, all the way to its heart. With that, the monster died. Meleager skinned the beast and offered it to Atalanta as her just reward, saying, "You made the boar bleed first, and if he hadn't died from our attacks, your arrows would have finished it." But Meleager's uncles were furious that he would dare give the honor to a woman. If their nephew didn't want it for himself, he should have offered it to his elders. Them. Meleager, still full of adrenaline from the hunt, grew angry, and as his anger festered, he ended up killing his uncles. A civil war followed, during which Meleager died. In the meantime, Iasus finally recognized his daughter's bravery. He welcomed her warmly and announced that she should marry in order to make sure to have an heir, but she didn't want any part of it. Atalanta was used to living alone, except for the dangerous expeditions she went on, and she enjoyed her life. She had never been in love and couldn't imagine submitting to a man. In addition, Apollo's priestess at Delphi had predicted that if she took a husband, great harm would come to her. Atalanta the Light-Footed knew that nobody could beat her in a race. Because her father insisted, she said she would accept marriage if he organized a competition. She would marry any suitor who could beat her in a race. If they couldn't win, they'd be put to death. With those conditions, she hoped that none would try for her hand, but she was disappointed. Despite the penalty of death, there were many young men who were lured to Iasus's court by Atalanta's reputation. They were all defeated, but more always came. I don't understand, thought Hippomenes, who came from Arcadia to assist in one of the races. Lose your life to win a woman. I can't imagine it's worth the risk. But when he saw the young woman arrive in the stadium, he changed his mind. Her tunic showed off her athletic body, the wind made her hair float in the air and caused ribbons on her sandals to flutter. Her pale complexion flushed with the effort of running. She was so beautiful. She won the race easily, and the losers suffered their fate. I understand the suitors now, thought Hippomenes, but these men were worthless. I'm better than them. Why don't I give it a try? May the gods help me. He found Atalanta to congratulate her and tell her that he wanted to compete. If I win, you won't be embarrassed to marry me. My father is a king in Boeotia, and the god of the sea, Poseidon, is among my ancestors. Surprised, Atalanta looked at him. He was handsome, and young, almost a boy. How brave! It would be too bad if he died. For the first time, the young woman was worried about one of her suitors. She tried to make him change his mind, but he refused. She almost wished he would lose to save his life. Hippomenes was confident, but he judged it prudent to ask Aphrodite for help. Goddess of love, she would surely come to his aid. Aphrodite was on her island, Cyprus. As she walked around her orchard, she had grown 3 golden apples. She gave them to the young man and told him how to use them. When the race began, the stadium was full. From the start of the race, the spectators favored Hippomenes. They felt he would win because of his youth, good looks, and clear complexion, and they screamed in support. Go for it, don't be intimidated. Atalanta seemed to fly. For a while, they were each as fast as each other, and for a moment, Hippomenes even broke ahead of Atalanta. The crowd cheered and cheered, but a few minutes later, he began to tire. His mouth was dry and he was out of breath, so he took the first golden apple from his tunic and sent it rolling down the track. Surprised, Atalanta bent down to pick it up, giving Hippomenes the chance to recover his breath and run past her. But his lead was short-lived. He then dropped the second apple, which the young woman picked up once more, and he passed her again. But she wasn't angry. Though she felt a desire to win, she also hoped to spare him from the horrible fate that awaited him. For the first time, she regretted the cruel rules she had set. Hippomenes, encouraged by the crowd, was gaining a lead. But he began to run out of breath again. He was so close to the finish line, it would be too bad. He sent a quick prayer to Aphrodite, and with all of his strength, threw the third apple on the side as far as possible. Atalanta hesitated for a moment. If she went to grab it, she'd risk losing the race, but the shining golden fruit was irresistible. She gave in to the temptation, and Hippomenes won the race. They married each other. In his joy, Hippomenes forgot to thank the goddess who made it possible for him to win Atalanta. Aphrodite decided to punish them. One night, while the two were traveling, they entered a temple to spend the night. The temple was dedicated to Rhea, mother of the gods. Their presence desecrated the sacred space. Aphrodite told Rhea, and she transformed them into lions and hitched them to her chariot. Atalanta, as a lioness, had kept her soul. She wanted to know why she, who hadn't asked Aphrodite for anything, had been punished this way. Should she have been wary of love and kept her independence? She longed to once again run free. Now that you've heard the tale of Atalanta the Huntress, as well as several other stories over the last several weeks, I wanted to take a moment to talk about interpretation and variation in mythology. Myths are largely an oral tradition in their beginnings, meaning that they are shared through people telling stories that get passed down through generations. This also means that there are several different versions of many of the same stories, as different storytellers make different choices over time about certain parts of the tale. But there is no one correct version in any of the Greek myths, and all are valid, which means for a contemporary audience, writer, or storyteller, the act of interpretation can be up to them. Take Atalanta's story. In the version you heard today, it was her choice to kill the suitors who failed to best her in a race in hopes of discouraging men from competing. But in other versions of the story, it is her father's decision to do so, much to Atalanta's dismay, as an act to try to pressure Atalanta into losing a race. Similarly, at the end of the tale, when Atalanta and her husband are changed to lions, there are versions where this takes place after many, many years of happy marriage and children, and comes as the price for the couple after they hunt in a sacred grove, having nothing to do with the fateful race of many, many years before. Think about how these changes to the story affect how you think about Atalanta and her tale. Interpretation is a powerful thing, and something to always be aware of when engaging with stories from so long ago. I have my own favorite versions of each story, and as you encounter other tellings of myths that you've heard before, you may find that you have your own preferences for how the tale is told. If you would like to draw the events of the story as you imagine them and you feel like sharing, ask a parent to help you submit them to the National Hellenic Museum, and we may share your version of today's story with others on our social media. As always, I would deeply love to see your version and your depiction of Atalanta the Fleet-Footed. Information on how to submit your artwork is in the description of this video. I hope that I captured your imagination today and that you think a little bit more about interpretation and storytelling, and I look forward to sharing another story from Greek mythology with you soon. Until next time.